everyone. Welcome again to the Chorus One podcast. Can't wait to intro our guest today. Please meet Matt Sorg from the Solana Foundation. Matt, welcome to Chorus One podcast. Can you please give us a little bit of an intro about yourself and your connection to Solana?
Yeah, a little bit into myself. I actually spent most of my career, start off in economics, but went to machine learning, data science. So pretty early on AI. This is kind of a while ago. I worked in games a lot. So for Riot Games, Unity, and then started two companies. One was a blockchain startup. The other one was using the AI background for a hearing aid startup, which is doing quite well, actually. We just did. We're starting our pre-sales. I'm no longer a full-time operator, but I did start it about 7 years ago. It's called Contra Labs. And then, when I was moving to an advisor, so not a full-time operator at that role, I joined Solana at the time, Solana Labs. And a lot of us moved over to Foundation as we structured the orgs. And roughly, I lead the tech side here, and it's my official title is VP of Technology, but it's basically we have the community token, and it's our responsibility to kind of facilitate the protocol, the operators on top, like the validators, RPCs, the infrastructure, and like the app layer. So technically, like facilitation and stuff. We have the other side of the org is kind of the growth org, and so that arranges conferences and does whatever tweets and kind of like that kind of mindshare BD. So it's kind of like tech and growth is roughly how it's structured, and I help lead the tech side.
Okay, that's super interesting. So was the same startup that you worked with game and AI, or were that different projects?
Totally different projects. Very different journeys there. But some similar like incubators we went through and stuff, but otherwise, completely destroyed.
That's interesting. And given that background on gaming, do you see synergies on between Solana and gaming, or perhaps even better, do you have a personal opinion on on-chain gaming?
So I think the base principle that we've started my first company for was buy once, play anywhere. It was this idea that if you have an open ledger, blockchain of your purchases, then any site, Steam, Epic Game Store, or whatever else comes out, itch.io, could then say, oh yeah, this person actually owns this. We'll allow them to play. It prevents the fragmentation. Now, the sites themselves have gotten less friendly to that. It actually was more friendly 7 years ago when I started doing that. But they've closed off a lot of those APIs. But the core principle is still there. If a game puts more and more on chain, in this case, the access pattern, but if they just put more on chain, then other entities can build stuff for you. So at Riot, we had this really pretty solid API that would just give you kind of match information, other friends' information, whatever. It's not like the most intense, but from that it came blitz.gg, op.gg. These are all like Mobilytics. These are all like really, really profitable, good businesses that essentially started off as fan sites, but grew into really good businesses around a really successful game. And if you put more on chain than that, then you can get more. Again, these independent businesses that are incentivized to find some place in the market, they can then do that. And that's where I think the various level of integrations should come from. I do think that like minting assets as NFTs and tokens as fungible tokens is part of that. I mean, it's essentially an API. It's like giving right access to the some game value itself, which is fine. I think it's okay, but I can understand why leading with that strictly financial version is turning off some customers. Users are just like, this is just Lootbox 2.0. They find it disingenuous because it doesn't lead with the value. But if you started with putting a little bit more logic on chain, or a little bit more community tools on chain, things like the ability to hold events and have them actually realized in games or match outcomes, I think then you'd see a lot more community interaction with it than you see today, and it wouldn't be so you basically demystify why you're using blockchain versus any other service, is because, oh, actually, we can all use this now.
Yeah, that's a good point. We saw like a big boom on gaming on chain at some point, and now it feels like it's slowed down quite a bit.
Yeah.
I hope it's back soon. So I really would like to better understand the Solana Foundation, perhaps from a purpose perspective, as one of the most mature foundations right now in the space. You guys have gone through a lot, and the ecosystem is there, right? It's present and flourishing beautifully. So, what is actually the main goal for Solana, in your opinion?
Solana Foundation or Solana itself?
Mm,
Because I think they're
the
very two different things in my mind.
Okay,
Yeah.
tell me both.
Okay. So the goal for Solana is just to be the global state machine that connects the world state as fast as the speed of light will allow. It's just, you can the motivating use case is something like decentralized NASDAQ. If you don't want it to sit just in one city, you don't want it just in New York, you want anyone in the world from South Africa to, Korea to Canada to be able to interact and have roughly the same information symmetry while trading. You can't have that in any one place. You don't want any of those, cross geolocations to trust each other. Like they don't necessarily. So you want this. It makes sense to put it on, and that's where Solana kind of comes from. It's a decentralized operation, like decentralized operation all around the world in its state. And the idea is that solves a lot of problems with marketplaces around the world, and even just collaboration between like disjoint entities anywhere in the world, and especially as our world gets more digital and money flows are more and more global. That problem matters to solve. Now, Foundation is really like it's an accelerator, I guess, and not like in like an incubator accelerator. We are an entity that's here to get to that vision as fast as possible. You have other people who are really concentrating on deep parts of the stack, either the protocol itself or building their application. But Solana Foundation is more like helping facilitate wherever that can be. And we roughly think about it as, again, I was saying earlier, like the core protocol itself. So the software that runs it, how do you make that better? How do you get more entities, more decentralized, so you don't rely on any one entity? How do you, and then the operators on top. So like, Chorus One, like all these, how do they set up for success, making sure they're profitable businesses and they're running the network well, and having easy contribution back. So it's partly tooling, but partly it's getting more and more operators. So it's things like the Solana Foundation delegation program, which has gotten a lot of disinformation around it, but it's really just to kind of bootstrap new validators so it's not as scary to start a validator on Solana, because that was a lot of FUD and people are. But I guess I'll stop there. That's a really good example of something where, like, at a time maybe 2 years ago, that delegation program looked a lot different than it is today. And a lot of that is because over time, the intention to all these things is Solana Foundation helps bootstrap something and accelerate something, but once it is living, we would recede. So very different than a normal company, where as Solana, the ecosystem grows and it starts fulfilling that vision, Solana Foundation actually gets less powerful, not more. And that's on purpose. We want eventually there to be essentially no foundation, or maybe just some like bookkeeping service or something, but nothing, like very, very low impact. And then over time, the operators themselves have just systems. You replace this entity with just like systems. So it's the same way that like blockchains replace middle people and fax machines with blockchains just replace all that with code. You'd have something similar with the foundation, where you just have systems in place, on-chain governance, et cetera, that would basically be replaced by, that would be replacing Solana Foundation.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that perspective. It actually reminded me of, yeah, think that's not really relevant for them from psychology thing.
Hmm.
Like, is Solana Foundation the mother of Solana?
Oh
As it
gosh.
should, yeah. As the child grows, the mother disappears,
Yeah, it
basically.
starts getting pretty morbid at the. Let's not take that
Analogies,
analogy to fruition.
analogies. And curious to understand then, you mentioned the decentralization, which is something that's part of your main focus. How do you define, what do you consider to be a decentralized um, ecosystem, or where, and when do you see Solana right now on this spectrum?
Yeah, I'll give you a very practical definition because I think, oh, it is very hard to find. There's so many different dimensions. People point to just like number of independent nodes operating. But I think maybe just from a user story perspective, what you want is that no one entity has outsized influence or like essentially equal influence. You want them to have semi-equal influence as anybody else, maybe rough on stake or something. But the maybe like a good user story is if I want to start an application, I don't want to have to worry about entering some network because something will censor me. I don't want to worry about Amazon shutting my thing off or like a single sequencer L2 like prioritizing some application that they built versus my application that's now deemed not as valuable as theirs for whatever reason it might be. Mine is taking more fees or whatever it would be. So like it's the very real business owner wanting to have full reign to operate the business in the way that they want, and knowing that in a decentralized governance or something that doesn't have any one entity, there's a lot more opportunity for me to have my influence or whatever that is on that more broader group of people as opposed to essentially some small group of people or entities that can collaborate against me. So that's like and this includes that I give like a minor version, but this includes like state actors or grander scales than I'm just talking about, because that would also affect my individual business's ability to run. So that's really like what we're all trying to get at here is like, if I want to interact with people online, which again, the world is getting more global, how do we do that in a way that it's minimal probability it gets disrupted, even if some very powerful, set of actors try to disrupt that. And you don't necessarily even need this like state actor meme. You could the operators of the network have their own incentives. And I think something I've definitely learned over the last couple of years is that at pretty realistic margins, the protocol itself has to make some decisions on censorship. You see that today with things like OFAC sections or the way that privacy is done. Like how is the chain going to handle that? And it's going to handle it slightly differently across different chains. But you want but a single sequencer is just unilaterally decides those things, when to upgrade, what kind of software update to do, all that stuff, and it provides some efficiencies in some ways, but it is really risky in others for business.
Yeah, and perhaps an elephant in the room when it comes to Solana. Solana has a very large ratio of staked assets and a very large validator set as well, probably one of the biggest. But there is still high concentration, and perhaps this is why one of the reasons why people still love to say that Solana is not decentralized. And I keep wondering if that's related to perhaps, how do you see, is that related to liquid staking not really, let's say, succeeding so much on Solana? There is like a large portion of assets still on centralized exchanges. So how do you see that?
Actually, I don't know the percentage of assets on centralized exchanges. Is it outsized relative to Ethereum or other?
Here I'm using mostly the percent of stakes that actually is operated by centralized exchanges.
Oh, sure,
So
sure,
it's like
sure.
you have large nodes on the network that are
Mhm.
actually centralized exchanges.
I see, I see.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So our, I guess, well, I'll start by, I think one of the things that's very attractive to us is something like applications are now really getting into the mix. And so, Jupiter, Helios are really good examples of that. They're both in like the top 50 now. Some Helios is even top 1 or 2 at any given time. And they've just basically attracted stake by they have their application and they want to use stake weight connections to operate their business better. So they offer better returns than other operators, and so they're able just to start their operator. And this is where I was kind of like related to decentralization I was talking about earlier. One of the main tenets of that is permissionless access to validation. A lot of the Solana competitors are either single sequencers or a constrained validator set where it's maybe 100, or you have to reach some certain stake amount. So it's really hard to bootstrap because it's really hard to get to that stake amount without having any validation services already. So having that really low barrier to entry that Solana has to it's permissionless, and you just need a few relatively much lower amount of Solana to be profitable. Then you get Jupe and Helios and a few other applications now entering the market. And I think that's what's really healthy is so as Solana gets more and more of those applications, it'll just have more and more competitiveness with the other types of stakers. Which you're right. There is Coinbase and Binance obviously have like a decent amount of stake, and nothing against. I don't have to speak any ill of them. It's just over time we want people who are like directly bought into the operation of the network and contributing to the network to be the ones that are like staking and doing stuff. So the part of the goal. So this is where it's like my job isn't just accelerating the core protocol itself. It is to try to help get more and more applications. And as some of those applications become successful, then you draw stake through those other applications. And they don't have to offer just like financial incentives. They could offer, we were talking about games earlier. If a game started doing really well, a game could offer some in-game perk. Maybe it's a name icon or banner on their avatar or something like that that indicates that they're a staker, and they could generate more revenue that way. So it's potentially another revenue stream for an application, and we feel that that's a very healthy evolution of the staking ecosystem on Solana.
yeah, that might be actually a good strategy. I like that you mentioned these both examples of applications, and you have seen that like more and more often on Solana ecosystem. Actually, that's actually the applications and
Yep.
also becoming the operators, and even operators also launching their own LLCs. So
Yep.
you
Exactly.
create this whole activity
Mm-hmm.
across the board, which is very interesting. I really wonder if that like who are the people that keep their assets on centralized exchanges when they have pretty nice staking yield. So
Yeah, I get it.
perhaps it's like people
Because
that are not very like crypto native that mostly do like a investment, like you buy Sol because you're interested in the long-term return, like as an asset, but perhaps not as a token because you don't really use the blockchain, perhaps, you know.
so Solana does do quite well in number of users that actually move to just doing stuff on chain. Pump.fun. There's like some very popular applications, obviously, and that's like so one of our efforts in this area is for example is Blinks. So we're trying to expand the places where you can do on chain things to Twitter or basically any application on the internet that that all the application has to do is allow for some sort of embedded link in a response, and then the wallets can inject any arbitrary UI. So the cleaner way of saying that is like, we can basically have some wallet front end, some even sales or voting, or just any arbitrary blockchain front end on almost any social site. So we started with Twitter, but the goal is to expand to basically any that are kind of open in this way. And we don't have to ask permission. All they have to do is ask for some very standard API rules. And so then, yeah, it gets more and more people working on chain. And so the applications are more robust. They interact with existing DeFi. Like what's really interesting here, I think, is that I can talk a lot about like all the cool applications on chain and whatever like that people are using today, but I think a lot of this stuff will be extracted away more and more and more. So say there's a Blink that has me just buying some good, some, you know, maybe it's a digital good. I want to buy an avatar for some game. I don't need to necessarily know that that thing is able to sell me the in-game item permissionlessly. The game itself didn't have to give permission to the storefront. I just have some assurances that this thing represents myself in game, because I can kind of, you can give me the proof. You know, I don't know the UI for it to display it, but you can kind of have confidence in that. You can certainly have confidence in it because you can see the issuer of that item. And then if say I want to pay in, I'm a European citizen, so I want to play in EU. I can do that, and then under the hood, it would translate it to whatever currency the game actually. So say it's a premium currency, premium token that would do all the purchases. As a user, don't necessarily have to see any of that stuff going on under the hood. All I think is, oh, I get paid in euro, and I want to pay for this thing, and because I want to use it in game, and they can just do that, and they can do it right on Twitter potentially from some influencer that was excited about that skin. So, but under the hood, like what the blockchain is handling is the payment rails, the switch from one currency to the other, the certification of that asset from Twitter to the game itself. So you're talking about all these like connected components and that's cool. One, they're obfuscated from the users, but two, each of those individual pieces didn't necessarily need to do any sort of business relationship with each other in order for them to connect, even on the back end. So like this permissionless back end where you can have these really interesting interactions that are just providing like to the end user some really good experience where, oh yeah, I really wanted the skin, now I can play it in my game. I got to interact with my favorite influencer in doing so. Like that's like a pretty cool user story that doesn't really exist today. Creators have a really hard time monetizing outside of like their specific platform that they're, you know, streaming on today. It's really hard for them to actually, they have to, you know, do some very specific relationship with each game in order to just sell or interact with those games. They have to do like specific airdrop campaigns or whatever on Twitch if they want to interact with the game itself. So you start adding possibilities for each of these entities to just independently, like, you know, form whatever business that is. And so I think that's like a lot of what we do is think about, you know, how do we facilitate that?
Yeah, makes sense. And so are you guys monitoring that, the activity on, let's say, Blink or something? Is there any insights that you could share about, for example, is people using that mostly for games, or what is the most common use?
I wouldn't say it's not mostly for games. Just people like Baxis is using it for their whiskey. There's a lot of it is, you know, commerce today. We can see the number of developers developing on it. So it's like number of hits the API. And then there's, I don't think there's, we can kind of see essentially what it's registered for, but we don't necessarily have complete visibility to the end user, like end uses. Like on chain, it's like you can see like some value transfer, but you don't necessarily know especially if it's like, you know, for whiskey or something, or just like some off-chain, if it's just like similar to Spotify, you won't necessarily know exactly what that thing is for. But what we can see is there's a lot of developers. There's a lot of people exploring what to use with it, and it's like a good example.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Because probably lots of new use cases will be showing up soon.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the goal, like kind of to answer your previous question, like the goal is to get more and more just like solving user problems or giving fun things to users so that, you know, they don't just sit their soul on an exchange. Nothing against the exchange. You just want there to be usable things that they want to do somewhere. And you want to, just have them have fun. And this is something that they do. And so it's like, maybe it's said another way, like blockchain's main product market fit today is some sort of like speculative asset. And I'm not like here against the casino or anything of it all, but I think more and more non-speculative, I just want to use this thing is just good for blockchain. Like that's where we want to get.
Totally agree. That's what we want. We need to get these people on board and using, spending time, definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
Very curious then. So this is already quite insightful. And is there any like recent achievement or something that you are really excited about right now?
I think the nameable achievement is just how like this, what I was talking about earlier with the foundation taking a lower and lower role. I think we're able to do that in a lot of areas now, especially with the community. Like even like this podcast, there's a lot of entities that clearly understand Solana. You know, of course, one being one of them. Like that are advocating for Solana, developing really interesting use cases. So even something like Blinks, while I probably took too much credit for it from Foundation, I think we're doing a lot to help. But Dialect, which is just a completely independent org, is the one that, well, it's actually Solana Pay that came from Solana Labs, which is like this base primitive for being able to do like memoization and like basically having it creating a blockchain transaction from a point and like sending that properly formed transaction, and then usually it was first used for just like a QR code on a point of sale. Blinks then said, hey, actually you can use that pretty arbitrarily, just like kind of embedded it into a site, and we can just take that properly formed transaction, add it on a little bit more layers, and even inject UI elements, not just QR code. We can just inject something arbitrarily. And all we have to do is get wallets involved. And so all we did in that as a foundation is like, hey, that's really cool. Here's some feedback. Here's some ways to iterate. And then when we get to something that we think is really awesome, then we sell it to the wallets themselves. So then we go to Phantom, Backpack, Soulflare, all the wallets, and then they actually do the implementation so they can inject it to the site. So this is a long-winded way of saying, like, I think the really cool thing here is think about all the entities I just talked about. Solana Foundation is actually important still today, but just certainly not like we didn't do all the things. I think that's like a pretty big milestone where no one entity is having to do something like lift a mountain in order to do all this. Like there's, I just named like 8 different independent entities that all had a hand, like a pretty sizable hand in this product launch. And I think that's like seeing that more and more and more, where like in the next year, I want to see a product launch as big as Blinks that I probably didn't even know about. Like that would be a really awesome moment.
The biggest achievement is like doing the least as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's because our goal, like that's the thing about these like code is law, permissionless systems, or whatever, is like if people just independently find like opportunity. So I actually think maybe to take a step back and like my ethos of blockchain, like I think there's certainly the self-sovereignty and all that stuff, which is great. I don't want other entities controlling what I do. Then almost any digital asset I do today is brokered through something else. Blockchain, I would argue, is basically the only place that I own a digital asset. Cool, but what does that like get me? It gets me to where if I interact with Google Maps, which I don't know, something like some astronomical amount of people in the world use Google Maps. Well, we're kind of all beholden to the 100 PMs that work at Google to decide what to do with Google Maps, that data. Whereas if that was a little bit more was on chain and it was a little bit more open systems, you'd have any number of people that could create awesome value for me based on that data. And that's where I think blockchains are going, is if you get more and more entities involved that are just seeing some financial opportunity, you could have better user experiences at the end. You don't need some like decentralization ethos based thing. You just need applications that are excited to do that, and then you eventually get better applications. The reason why it's taking a long time is that it is more complex. One entity figuring out some end-to-end stacked Google Maps, even if it's cumbersome, where you have to have drivers with these like weird cameras all around instead of Hive Mapper cameras that are on Solana. Like if you have to have like these more frictions in some places, it's usually fine because you're controlling every single part of it, and you can kind of have the budget to make it work. The centralized version just takes more time, but the idea is that eventually that will make it more robust. And my what I'm seeing now is it's actually starting to accelerate, where certain product lines, you get more and more people involved. So like when we release Blinks instantly, 200 different developers are developing on it, and that is hard to happen if it was something that was completely central. So for example, like, and this is great because we don't have to ask Twitter. Like we are not beholden by Twitter's development pipeline in order for this decentralized version to find applications. So that we just need to find more and more of those types of areas.
And you mentioned briefly the Solana Labs. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit from the inside how did the transition from Solana, the protocol behind Sol, moved from Solana Labs to Anza, and perhaps some motivation?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is like Solana Labs was kind of it was two different organizations in practice. It was this nonprofit core protocol development org, so maybe for people listening who aren't familiar, I mean, I'm sure you're very familiar as Course One, like all Solana Labs, like as a singular entity before Anza split out, all they did for the protocol was all they do is post to GitHub. They don't push to any validator. Validators have to download and run the software and compile it themselves. Like there's no obfuscation. They know exactly what code they're downloading and running. So it's all, that's another way of saying itself, like the core protocol org isn't like selling. There's nothing to sell. They're not actively running something and taking some rake. They're not even they don't even run validators. So they are a permissionless, or they are a nonprofit entity. But then you were sitting that org, the core protocol org, next to very much for-profit, like Solana Mobile. They're selling phones, GameShift, Bond now. They basically a bunch of for-profit things. Solana Ventures, which is a venture arm that uses balance sheet money from Solana Labs, leadership. So it's really just like, very, very, very different remits. You have like people releasing consumer products, and then you have people releasing like a core, not-for-profit core protocol. So it really just made sense to kind of distribute those out into completely different orgs with completely different remits and different structures, because how they operated was so different.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And well, I mean, in this conversation, we'll have to talk about staking and staking again, because this is our expertise.
That's right.
I'd like to know, what is the foundation opinion or strategy regarding liquid staking? Is it something that you guys bet on, like increasing the percentage? Right now, I think last time I checked, at least Solana had about like 3.5 B dollars in liquid staking, which sounds like a lot, but it's proportional to the 70 B total stake on Solana is quite small. And this could be also a great way of decentralizing, right? Because of the pools, I imagine. So yeah, just wanted to understand, how do you guys see it, and if there is like any active action that you guys are taking in regards to that.
Yeah, I mean, we're really excited about Sanctum. I mean, I think there's one. Okay, I think we want to make a distinction. There's some things we really care about, but it's unclear what we would do about it. So there's this is actually something where like any like kind of powerful entity in our position can get it wrong really quickly. Is sometimes, even if something's really valuable, you still can't really do very much. It kind of needs to be emergent. So we kind of think of our different ways that we can facilitate things as either build it ourselves, which is pretty cumbersome and obviously not scalable. There's influence, which is like this podcast or us just putting out a blog or just talking to people or whatever it might be, incubators or different Breakpoint, different events, and then treasury. And that's where we give grants for certain things. And so, but sometimes none of those things really make sense. The only thing that really makes sense sustainably is somebody just emergently sees a business for it. And from that, you kind of get Sanctum coming out that makes these really, you get a bunch of different plays into the liquid staking area. And you have a bunch of people even making restaking, which obviously works on on top of LSTs, which might generate more yield. Now, in that place, there's not. We've thought a lot about like what can we do to facilitate this, because there's obvious profit motives, and that ecosystem kind of has to be valuable to a user that wants to restake to begin with. So it's not like, I don't think us super heavy hand holding it would really make sense. We really want there to. So we've taken both a technical approach to kind of like talk to these entities and how to execute well and make good applications. I think the heaviest handed thing we've done is we've helped like bootstrap some of Sanctum's Sol pool, so we have a little bit of Sol in there. But other than that, like we are very much kind of like the influential facilitators, because we want to just sustainably grow. We don't want to just do some like incentive program or something and then have a bunch of people do it and then they don't have anything to do there. So we kind of like how it's going right now, even though it doesn't appear to be going incredibly fast. And I agree with you that it would be great if there was more percentage liquid staking, but it is growing. And it's growing in a way that there's multiple different entities kind of like figuring out and piecing what is the liquid staking ecosystem. Again, LSTs, AVSs, different DeFi primitives that are now backed in liquid staking tokens. So there's this is maybe a huge tangent, but a lot of these markets, if they're just using sold the asset unstaked or USDC, like that isn't generating yield, they can actually be pretty capital inefficient for the user. So something like a prediction market, one of the cool things they're doing, they're actually using Athena or potentially even using LSTs. They could potentially use something like an LST under the hood, because one of the problems with the prediction market is the underlying asset that you're using for prediction oftentimes isn't appreciating. And so most gambling actually has quick turnaround times for this reason. It's capital efficient. I just bet on a game for that weekend and I get 2 days later, I know if that, or whatever, less than a week later, I know if that game is positive or negative. But if I want to do something a little bit more long-lived, like an election, that's 2 months away now. But if I did that back in May, it'd be half a year away. I'd have pretty capital inefficient. Like I would only be making some amount of money off of the fluctuation of the prediction market. But if I used an LST or if I used like something like Athena, which is a USD that generates yield, then I would even have an efficient market while I was entering my position. And so this is what we're pretty excited about, that aspect, that more and more DeFi is being built on top of LSTs instead of native Sol. So it's a better user experience because I'm not having that capital efficient market. And you can apply that same kind of principle to any otherwise capital inefficient sector. Using LSTs would just give, who doesn't have the opportunity cost of not being able to stake. You're still using a staked asset, either for collateral or for whatever purpose.
I love that. Like we care a lot. We care about a lot of things, but we don't necessarily do something about them. Okay, so perhaps let's get a bit technical then, because we know that Solana is one of the blockchains right now, the networks that handle the most data, I think, the most load of like transactions and activity, and there's a lot of MEV. And I mean, I've been following up with Solana for at least 2 years now, and I feel really proud as if it was me, but it wasn't. But I kind of really like seeing how well actually it has been performing on the technical side. Yeah. So there were some improvements into the protocol. Still this year, there was an issue, but it was a different issue. It wasn't an issue on the protocol level. It wasn't like a bug or something. So can you perhaps talk about how do you see the technical aspects and performance? Are we like in the state of the art, or what do you see that can still be improved and how?
Yeah. So one, Solana on any given day will do more transactions than all the blockchains combined. At least public blockchains. Like there's some private ones that, but of public blockchains that go through just some sort of decentralized consensus, Solana does more than all others combined most days. So it's very differentiated technology. Now a little bit of that is based on demand. There's certainly some other blockchains that can, if they're all firing at full demand, they would, in aggregate exceed Solana. So I think that can be true. But Solana isn't nearly done yet. There's so much to improve on the underlying efficiency of the chain. So I think there's something that can happen like very often. So it's something you may have been hinting at is that there was some congestion back in, April, May, I believe. Now that was pretty awful time for the user experience. And I think there was a lot of people who just, get up on their soapbox on Twitter and be like, yep, see, told you, Solana fundamentally can't scale. I think there's some belief that we just pushed that can down the road, which really isn't true. Like, I think the reality, like these are all just like engineering concerns. Every time you 10x some sort of load in some other places, you're going to hit some bottleneck, and it's just engineering. You have to figure out the right implementation. In that instance, it was actually the quick implementation because it fixed some issues that we were facing congestion about 2 years ago. Fixed some, but it introduced some other bottlenecks in certain types of transaction insertion patterns, and so we had to help fix them. Quick is made essentially by Google, and that's where the original protocol comes from. But the Rust implementation called Quinn had some inefficiencies in it. It was just the way that it locked threads, and it was a single-threaded thing for the acknowledgement. So just the way that the communication pattern works. So yeah, we just had to fix it. And now people just presume, I think incorrectly, that today Solana is not improved. There's just some, the transaction load is just less today than it was then. But that's not true. We've seen it as much, like similar amounts of transaction load, or V2 released and all this stuff, and the network handled it fine. So I think that there's this, and that's going to continue to happen. Firedance are coming out. There's so many different improvements to the Anza client. It's harder for us to make some very specific, sexy roadmap because a lot of this stuff is actually just not as sexily like splurge, whatever. Like, I don't know. We are more of like a show, that's like our ethos, like show, don't tell. Like we are going to just continue to improve the protocol, and the core protocol itself, like the spec, is basically the most efficient use, of decentralized software that you can make. So the goal is just to make sure that we are meeting that spec closer and closer to be maximally like performant. And I haven't seen any other specs that I believe really outperform Solana in the best cases. And so, like best engineering cases. So that's like kind of our goal, is to get more entities involved. So you have more eyeballs figuring out all these, implementation details, and continuing to progress the protocol.
Yeah, it feels to me that Solana is constantly being like battle tested, and that's why people talk about. And it's so annoying when I read like very negative comments, because usually they come from people that they don't really understand what's going on there. Like one of the most popular articles I ever wrote as a researcher was one of the improvements to the Solana protocol, like almost I think 2 years ago, and then I was talking about Quick. Stake-awaited KOS. This is something that only exists on Solana.
Yeah.
And it's pretty impressive. It's like optimizing on RPC and traffic and load.
Yeah.
It's very sophisticated. So it's really, really nice to see it actually working now, because all of these are actually implemented in live. Only the fee markets is not, because the fee markets was the third part.
Yeah.
Is there any status on that? How do you see it evolving?
Well, there are the priority fees are live. The thing that is still kind of being worked on is the reliability on individual pieces of state and the access. So there's different pieces of that. One, like, and they're being released over time.
Is it local free market though? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So that one fee, the priority fee, does both prioritization across, but eventually, so how do I say this? That priority fee, to the user perspective, there's not going to be a separate local fee versus priority fee. It should be one fee. The thing that is not as efficient today is right now there's no base fee change. So that priority fee is used for both essentially a base fee and a local fee. But eventually that'll kind of like realign where there's going to be a fluctuating base fee, just like similar to Ethereum or whatever. So like if there's some overall load, then there's some dynamic base fee adjustment that will have a 50% burn, and then the priority fee, just that extra fee for like the local fee market for MEV, for hot pieces of state, that will have a 0% burn, and that's like the way it'll go. The thing that's not really this is where I think people could kind of get confused, where in order for all that to work, there's actually a lot of implementations. So Solana is multi-threaded. So the main thing is about scheduling transactions and block packing in a way that is efficient, but still takes involved all the other meta information, like not just how many threads are locked or read-write contention, which transactions you can parallelize. It's also doing that efficiently while taking into account the fee markets. And that's where you start getting into local fee markets is, okay, you are appropriately putting stuff into differentiated threads that are non-blocking. Now I need to order them based on this fee. Those things are, just being developed to be more and more efficient. But as they become more efficient, then it plays out to actually be local. So there's nothing really preventing them today from being local, other than kind of the efficiencies in the way that things are being scheduled. And so these are all like kind of being worked on in parallel, because there are other right now. The other issue is there is no dynamic base fee, so people are kind of using both. Like the way that it's the transaction insertion is the base fee is just like a static thing, and people are only adjusting priority fee. Really, people should be adjusting some sort of total fee, part of it being a base fee, part of it being a priority fee. So there's just like these things that are being developed in parallel that will be cohesive over time. That's kind of actually what I do, is making sure that all of these kind of disjoint implementations across, like, some of this actually touches, more or less the ingest pipeline. Some of it touches block packing. Some of it touches, more like state economics. So and it's about making sure that all those proposals are cohesive.
And is there any timeline you see for testing or things to coming live?
Well, that's the thing. Things are coming live every patch. So it's an iterative approach. So what went live last patch was the central scheduler, which is not like a centralized scheduler. Let's be clear. Each individual validator having a more efficient scheduler. That's what went live. I just don't think we should use centralized on like wording. All it is just yeah. Well, anyway, but that went live. So that's actually one of the main pieces that needs to be there in order for there to be more efficient block packing and the validator software to more efficiently route transactions. And so then you can be more accurate around localizing that fee to prioritizing that transaction. So and that's why it's kind of hard for us. Again, this is kind of like I was saying earlier, we don't have these like branded splurge, merge, whatever, because Solana development is way more iterative, which is way faster. Like I would actually argue that like in the last 2 years, Solana has changed probably more than Ethereum in its history. I think actually it's pretty cut, maybe in the last year. I actually think even just this year, if you think about the way, you probably know this, that we just talked about the way that like Quick and Stick quality of service and all these other things interacted. The topology of the way that a transaction is sent on Solana today is drastically different than just January this year. I could go through the whole thing, but you used to just have a user forward it through an RPC and it would go to the leader. Now you have stake weight quality of service that goes in the way. You have different ways of seeing what the priority fee should be. So you have different entities that get like host APIs. Like basically the topology is like drastically changed. And this is really cool to see all these independent entities help with that. Those different routing services. People are setting up RPCs that are localized to different validators. And so like this kind of like massive development that's happening, and it's part of it is on the protocol software, part of it is on the RPCs and validator where they're operating. So but it's very iterative. These things happened in like kind of assess it. You build out quick call service better. You build out the quick layer better. You build blah blah. And these things so any one release wasn't enormous. It was just steadily increasing, and that's what we'll continue to do basically. So I could kind of describe to you more and more about all of the I'm kind of using layman's terms like efficient block packing, but I'm actually under the hood there talking probably about, I don't know, any number, 50 different little things that Anza and Firedancer are going to improve in the algorithm that we could brand and we could name, but just in the interest of time, we just like continue to iterate. It just improves. So
we just call V1.18.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. We just call it V1.18, and then and then we move on, and then the user experience is better. So I think actually this is a pretty core ethos thing. A lot of other communities are very research based, and I think another way of saying that is like they talk a lot about the protocol improvements and potential protocol improvements. We're not as much about that. There's some longer term things like asynchronous execution and multiple concurrent block producers that are longer term thinking. We have some of those for sure, but not. But we are very much like a continually ship and upgrade. So like in the next few patches, we're going to be releasing this improvement to the Anza client, or performance improvement to the Anza client called direct mapping. That one is a very decent scale change to the way that the memory management happens within the client. Now, are we branding it and calling it some crazy memory efficiency thing? No, we're just going to release it, and it's going to improve the Anza clients. That you probably didn't know about it, right? But this is I think there's a fundamental thing here. We are improving the developer experience and then therefore the user experience approach, as opposed to, hey, our protocol is super sexy because we have this thing coming down. Here's this paper that shows you what we will probably build. Because the implementation details matter so much in these things. Oftentimes those things don't never get shipped. So instead of doing that whole rigmarole, we would rather just iterate and build out these things that we know should exist, and know that there's some we'll hit some bottlenecks over time and kind of have to iterate on it. And eventually you get to the protocol that you see today that's doing more transactions than all the chains combined. That on at very low latency. I don't know if you've seen the numbers of the P90 and the P50, that kind of actual transaction full cycle times is sub-second. Even in many transactions are actually landing in the first slot. It's just incredibly fast user performance today, even at pretty solid load. So
the way I see it is you open space for the chaos of a decentralized system to exist, because you can't really predict, right? How people's gonna use the network, and then the priorities, and then demand and new, let's say, needs are showing up. Makes sense.
Other technology improvements. Maybe there's some other algorithm that comes along that makes some efficiency. Either actually we're doing this right now. There's a company that has a more efficient way of doing what's called coding. We use erasure coding for some of the shred propagation. This might be a more efficient way, and so we might implement it. We're not talking about it. We're not spreading to the hills that there's some more. Nobody's gonna care, right? But what they're gonna care is what's gonna care is how efficient block. So we call it turbine, but block propagation to the rest of the network. It might just become more efficient in the next year. So I don't know. These are the things that we're constantly doing, and so that the applications are the ones that hopefully take the limelight, because they just run a really awesome application. It's minimally minimal frictions to their users.
Yeah, okay. And And how does the foundation see MEV right now? Because we saw for the first time, I think historically, the foundation took action
Yeah.
against like protecting the users, which was very interesting, against sandwich attacks from running bots. And yeah, we saw also Jito shutting off the mempool.
Yeah.
Curious to hear a little bit about that.
I think some MEV is really good. The contested transaction type of, contested state type of MEV is good. Everybody has equal access to a piece of state. There's a lending default. There's a buy order that everybody wants to have. That kind of MEV over that is great. I actually think it's like going to be the main revenue generator for, block producers like CourseOne. That's the part that is bad is like, sandwich attacks, which is loosely defined as things that affect an in-flight transaction. So some semi-unexpected behavior from the user perspective that, it affects some other transactions get placed on the network, given the knowledge of that in-flight transaction that affected in some way. That's definitely negative. Like that just is a bad user experience, because by definition, what I'm saying is like the user didn't really intend for that to happen. And so that one we are actively not using stake. So I want to be very clear about this. The delegation program is around 14% of stake. So we have certainly some influence over some operation of the network, but I think it's way exaggerated. It's not, it's a permissionless, as you know, right? We don't stake to you. You guys are big enough that you're not part of the delegation program. So there's only, the long tail of, early starting validators that get this. So it is not the majority of stake on the network or any. So, but those, as we do try to exert our influence where we can as people who want to see the network, flourish and a great user experiences, we don't stake to validators who run sandwiches. So there's also just on the protocol level, I think that's actually the better thing long term. Like we can kind of do this like whack-a-mole, Jito, us, whoever else, like figure out what you can kind of do. But in the long term, you kind of just need these to be a more system approach. So one of the things I was mentioning earlier is asynchronous program execution. The idea that you would probably pack a block before you'd execute it. That's potentially very helpful to prevent negative MEV, because if you're packing a block before you actually execute it, you may not see the ramifications of that transaction. So it's harder to know that it's profitable to sandwich it. So, and block packing can happen so fast that it's hard to even program algorithmically what a good sandwich attack on that would be. So, and this gets down even like deeper into the architecture of Solana. On Solana transaction inclusion, you name all the accounts that it's going to touch. Basically, you name all the pieces of data. So you can efficiently pack a block without having to program it to execute anything. That's very different than an EVM ecosystem that they just don't do that. So they have to do these optimistic, like block STM type of things, which are good in the optimistic case, but way worse than Solana in any sort of contested case. So that's why I was kind of saying earlier, like Solana is optimizing what I think is for the right things. Like the interesting things happen on blockchain on these like open systems where anybody can compete over different pieces of assets or state or whatever it might be. So I think it's the I don't know, easier is probably not the right word, but asynchronous block production where you're producing blocks before you do run the live transaction. And then like longer term, there's even multiple concurrent block producers. And the idea there is there's an opportunity that if you have two different block producers executing transactions, if you have one that puts a transaction pre and post another transaction, then it's more easy to say that one is doing something kind of nefarious because you have another block producer who's not doing that. And you're saying, hey, why would you have these other two transactions specifically around this transaction? It's much easier to kind of show that there's maliciousness there if one of the clients isn't and the other client is doing something that clearly affects another transaction. So this is iterative. We'll roll out these kind of more protocol level and things over time. I think that, but the key distinction here, kind of what I was saying earlier, is there's nothing fundamental about Solana that makes it MEV prone. I actually say even today it's the opposite, where low block times prevent, like in the Ethereum world, there's only like 3 block producers that produce 90% of blocks. It's actually extremely centralized.
Yeah, no, but nobody talks about that.
Nobody talks about it. Everybody just talks about how Solana is centralized for sure. But what they are able to do is, because the block times are so long relative to the amount of computation it takes, they can really wait to like the end of a block and really be searching through the mempool to find the most profitable things, and actively be sandwiching and inserting their submission. But you don't really have that time on Solana. You can do trigger-based stuff where you're like seeing it as the transactions come in. You can do some trigger, like, oh, this one's sandwichable, boom. But like that, so that's way harder than the Ethereum world, where you just have this mempool where you're like literally searching for transactions that you can sandwich. So there's already some preventions today, and then as you add in, so actually maybe like a wider concept that I think is important here is that eliminating MEV is probably like not a thing. Like absolute, absolute, like MEV is just going to be something all the way down. The point here is to make, over time, there just being more and more frictions to it, so it's more costly to the sandwich or the negative MEV person than it is profitable. So they just don't do it, because in order to do it, like searching takes too long, or whatever the computational cost of finding a good transaction exceeds the block time, so you're not actually able to sandwich the in-flight transaction. Like there's all these things that just becomes prohibitive for them to be successful in their MEV attempts. So that's the goal.
Yeah,
so
certainly the base fee as well would help that. Because
exactly.
Solana right now is very cheap, and spamming still makes sense.
Right. So a malicious validator could just insert it without having any, and just pay the base fee, right?
Yeah.
Right. So exactly. So it's like, as you get those costs more and more accurate, then and produce more and more friction, so make it hard to search, all these other things, then it just becomes more and more expensive for MEV, and then you really only get the really high return ones that go through, but you just have to constantly increase the bar and then lower the impact on any given transaction. So these are just things happen in parallel, and then eventually, hopefully, we think we can get to the point where there's going to be some MEV, but you're on the whole, the applications know how to handle it and give good feedback to the user about what the risks are, etc.
But Matt, I was here thinking, we can't really close this conversation without talking about memecoin economy.
Okay.
This whole MEV thing, this whole load of traffic, and all the activity we are talking about was triggered very, very much by memecoins. I think about almost 1 year ago, when it started, like really, really heavily. And I'd love to hear a little bit, how do you see it? And other high potential products as well that you're seeing emerge.
Yeah. So first, I would not say meme coins are the aspirational end use of decentralized technology, but I'm not against it. Like, lotteries exists,
and gambling
is a thing. People have been doing this for years. So I think that the presumption that meme coin trading isn't sustainable, I think, is just false. Now, is it going to be sustainable? I don't know. But writing it off as like this flash in the pan, I think, is actually incorrect. I think a lot of things are happening that are quite interesting. Like, you have people talk about Pump.Fund, but Pump.Fund sits next to all of the DeFi ecosystem, all of the other perps and swaps and Jupe and all these other things. So there's a whole ecosystem around things that are and derivative projects of Pump.Fund that add, I don't know, whatever, Dumpy or whatever, all these other things that people are exploring to build alongside it permissionlessly. Nobody has to ask each other. People are just building stupid stuff. Blinks has facilitated some, so I actually think that is a really awesome concept. That is a bunch of people getting together to make that ecosystem more fun. And and they're all independently incentivized to do it. So whatever comes,
Quite
I think,
realistic as well, because NFTs, when it emerged, was a bit kind of like, oh no, but this is art. We are collecting art, etc. So it kind of like brought some seriousness to a thing, almost like, no, there is a purpose in it. But at the
it
end,
was
you
also
just want to
speculative. People were
trade and have
buying it
fun.
mostly. I mean, I would say, I mean, one-to-one art is still being purchased. The thing that's been taken out of the NFT is as much of like the speculative part, because people realize like, yeah. So, but I think one of the nice things about Memecoin is like, there's no presumption of this other thing. It's like, this is just gambling. This is PvP, net zero sum kind of game. That is it. Like, there's no presumption that you're like, yeah, doing some sort of like extra motive thing. Like, it is, I'm entering in this competitive marketplace, trying to find the fun memes before other people find the fun memes, and then dump on other people before they realize I'm about to dump. Like, that is the game. So, and again, I'm not saying it's going to be sustainable. I'm just saying I'm not as bearish on some iteration. And to be clear, I don't think the exact thing that you see today is going to be the long. If it becomes sustainable, it has to evolve. I'm not. That's. But what I'm saying is, you have hundreds of different entities evolving it. That's the cool part. That's the thing that I think has potential. Now, is it going to find the magic and become sustainable? I don't know, but I think it has more of a shot than people give it credit for. That's all I'm saying. Because there's some configuration of this where, like, you have this cross-platform engagement tool for creators. You have this brands now have some like meme loyalty thing that they can figure out something next to their product, whatever that evolves to. I'm just naming some possibilities, but yeah. But the point here is, I could probably start not rattling off like 10 or maybe it's like a political campaign releases some like initial like, should I run type of thing. Like, who knows? Like, there's so many different potential here, because everybody gets to kind of decide. And as long as there's a market for it, there's a market for it. Like, who am I to say? And so I think that's got a lot more potential than what I think people are giving credit for today. And that's all I'm saying. And then I guess more tangibly, it's really good data for us as, progressing the technologies on how people are using the chain, how the chain is ingesting this amount of load. Like, having this amount of load this early in the evolution, like Solana is less than 4.5 years since Genesis block. So it's amazing to have this much demand. Like, in some days we have more demand than like very, very popular applications.
I think Chorus 1 is there since Genesis block. I think Chorus 1 is there since Genesis.
Yeah, you were. Yeah. I actually know, because you were part of the Cosmos ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the initial Solana validators come from that like initial co-host quarter Cosmos, that were like, yeah, sure, we'll give Solana a try. Yeah, so yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, OGs. Well, so now we are like less than a month until Breakpoint. What to expect? What do you want to tell people about it?
I think
join us.
As somebody who has gone to somebody who's gone to a lot of conferences, so especially when a lot of the FTX things was happening, it was kind of important to us to not just like bury ourselves into a hole, because there's this, like, as much as FTX didn't really affect us and as a technology, there's certainly the self-fulfilling prophecy is where everybody just kind of stops caring about you and doesn't insert capital into businesses that are otherwise successful in the ecosystem. It can kind of have very negative ramifications. So during that time, I went to a lot of conferences and just made sure that people know that we were still building, and kind of just like letting them know our perspective on things. But man, some of these conferences are very low signal. The kind of the meme is like, there's more panelists than people watching the talks, and they're all pretty late. Like, even on a panel, like, what kind of conversations are you having that actually move the deal? Like, can you remember some awesome answer on any panel you've ever listened to? Probably not. Maybe there's a talk here and there that like you really liked.
I have to say, this year the conferences I've been, I was pretty underwhelmed by like technical insights or even
Yep.
business insights. Usually you go and you know the people that you already knew or the teams
Yep.
that are building the thing
Exactly.
that you already know, which is like, as it could be restaking or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever.
So I'm not going to
I
take
agree.
any credit other than voicing what you just said similarly, not as well spoken, but other than that, I'm not going to like, that's all I kind of did internally. And then the people who are organizing the conference are, I think at the very least, very legitimate exploration into what a conference could be. Instead of panels, we're having debates, and instead of these really long, boring announcements, we're having essentially like lightning talks. And then we do have some more deeper dives onto technical topics. So like maybe some alpha, it's like fire dancer type of stuff, or other deeper dives on different parts of the development stack. So it's like either like the only things that are giving like a longer form are ones that are just deeper, informative, that kind of like technical talks. Otherwise, it's like this supposed to be like a cute, fast form, like highly engaging. Everything is like internet worthy, where you can just put up on a TikTok reel or shorter form YouTube video. And I don't know, I'm really excited for it. I think it's a very viable exploration to what a conference and like what actual information dissemination in this more digital world could be.
I'm really looking forward for Singapore and for meeting as well. The whole
Yeah.
community is always very good. Last year, unfortunately, I wasn't at Breakpoint. That was in Amsterdam. I was the one before that was here, actually in Lisbon. Just after everything happens, that damn week. So I'm really excited to see everyone again. And that would be really amazing. Um, well, I think that's it on my side. Anything else you would like to tell our listeners before
Um,
we close?
uh, let's see. I don't know. I think the let's see, what would be a main thing? I don't know. I think let us know. Like just uh, be active. I think the main thing is having more and more people creating. I think if you're interested in Solana, like if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not some sort of degen or whatever, but just more people getting involved and thinking about how to form businesses from first principles. I want these users, whether it be infrastructure, other businesses, or end users, like what is the problem I'm solving for them, and like let's see if there's some way we can work together to make something awesome. And if blockchain happens to be the best backend for that business, like happy to talk about how Solana could be the best one. Like that, I think that's the main thing that we're all trying to do here.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matt. It was a pleasure to talk to you today. And thanks everyone for listening. See you soon.